My daughter-in-law told guests he's just a security guard, then Secret Service came to escort me. My name is Michael Turner. I'm 62 years old. My daughter-in-law thinks my life is worth $12 an hour. She thinks I'm nothing more than a tired old man who checks IDs at office buildings and counts the minutes until my shift ends. She looks at my 2015 Honda Civic with the dent in the passenger door, my one-bedroom apartment in the part of town where successful people don't visit, and my off-the-rack suits from discount stores, and she sees failure. She sees embarrassment. She sees someone who never amounted to anything. But here's what she doesn't see. Here's what she can't see, because she's never learned to look past the surface of anything in her privileged little world. Appearances don't always tell the truth. Sometimes the most dangerous man in the room is the one everyone underestimates. Sometimes the guy in the cheap suit has more secrets than the millionaire in the designer tuxedo. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe has a sense of justice so perfect, so poetic, that when it finally reveals itself, it takes your breath away. Let me tell you about the night my daughter-in-law's arrogance finally caught up with her. Let me tell you about the moment when her cruel laughter died in her throat and the whole world saw her for what she really was. But first, let me tell you how we got there, because the setup makes the payoff so much sweeter. It started 2 years ago when my son David brought home this woman. Jessica Whitmore. Even her name dripped with entitlement. 28 years old, blonde hair that cost more to maintain than most people's rent, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me. She came from money, old Martha's Vineyard money, the kind that traces back to whaling fortunes and railway investments. Her family owned construction companies, had contracts with half the government buildings in Massachusetts, and moved in circles where my son was lucky to be invited. The first time she insulted me was at a family dinner. David was so proud, introducing me to his girlfriend's family at some upscale restaurant where the cheapest entree cost more than I made in a day. When her father asked what I did for work, David started to answer, but Jessica cut him off with that laugh of hers. "Oh, Michael's just a night guard," she said, waving her hand like she was shooing away a fly. "He works doors, not deals, if you know what I mean." The table went quiet for a moment. Her parents exchanged glances. David's face went red, and I could see him struggling with whether to defend me or keep the peace with his new girlfriend. I kept my mouth shut and finished my salad, even though every bite tasted like sawdust. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that young people sometimes speak without thinking. I told myself that she'd learn better with time. I was wrong. The insults kept coming. At her brother's birthday party, she made sure everyone knew about my adorable little Honda, and how I probably couldn't afford valet parking. When we went to a company picnic for her father's business, she introduced me to the other guests as David's dad. "He's in security," with that same dismissive tone she'd used to describe the help. Every slight was carefully calculated, designed to remind everyone present that I didn't belong in their world. But the worst part wasn't the humiliation. The worst part was watching my son slowly start to believe her version of who I was. David began making excuses for why I couldn't attend certain events. He stopped calling as often. When he did visit, he seemed embarrassed by my apartment, my car, my clothes. Jessica had planted a seed of shame in his mind about his own father, and I watched it grow week by week. The breaking point came during their wedding planning. They'd decided on a July 4th weekend ceremony at Martha's Vineyard, a $500,000 extravaganza that would be attended by politicians, business leaders, and what Jessica liked to call, people who matter. When they were discussing the seating chart, Jessica's voice carried from the kitchen to where I sat in the living room. "We need to think carefully about where we put Michael," she was saying to David. "Maybe at the vendor table? I mean, he's basically working class, and I don't want him saying something inappropriate to the governor or the mayor. You know how he gets. How I get. I'd barely spoken 3 words to this woman in 2 years because every time I opened my mouth, she found a way to make me feel small. David's voice was quieter, but I caught enough. He's my father, Jess. He raised me alone after Mom died. He deserves better than. He deserves what he's earned. She cut him off. And what he's earned is a security guard's salary and a security guard's respect. I'm not going to let him embarrass us in front of my family's friends. That night, David came to me, looking like a man torn in half. Dad, he said, I need you to help me understand something. Jessica keeps saying things about your past, about how you never achieved anything, and I need to know the truth. Were you always just a security guard? Did you ever do anything else? I looked at my son, my boy who used to think I hung the moon, who used to brag to his friends about his dad who worked important jobs that he couldn't talk about. Now he was asking me to prove my worth to a woman who saw people as stock portfolios with legs. Some truths can't be explained, David, I told him. They have to be revealed. And sometimes the people who need to learn those truths have to learn them the hard way. What does that mean? It means your wife has a lot of growing up to do. And growing up usually involves falling down. He left that night more confused than when he arrived. But I'd made my decision. I could have told him everything right then. I could have shown him the documents locked in my bedroom safe, the commendations, the photographs with senators and generals whose names he'd recognize. I could have explained why I'd walked away from that world, why I'd chosen a quiet life over a prestigious one. But Jessica needed to learn her lesson the hard way. And the universe, I was beginning to suspect, was preparing quite a lesson for her. 3 weeks before the wedding, she called me directly for the first time in months. Michael, we need to talk. Her voice had that crisp, business-like tone she used when she was about to deliver bad news. I've been thinking about the wedding, and I'm concerned about some of the guest list complications. What kind of complications? Well, David insists on having you there, but I need you to understand the caliber of people who will be attending. We're talking about federal contractors, military liaisons, people with serious security clearances. And frankly, having someone from your background might raise questions. My background. If she only knew. What exactly are you suggesting, Jessica? I'm suggesting that maybe you might be more comfortable watching the ceremony from the parking lot. Or maybe we could set up a live stream for you at home. I just think it would be better for everyone if I wasn't there. If you weren't visible. Look, Michael, I know this is hard to hear, but you have to understand. My father's business depends on maintaining relationships with very important people. These aren't the kind of people who are impressed by night shift workers. I can't have you accidentally saying something that might hurt David's future with my family. I was quiet for so long that she actually asked if I was still on the line. I'm here, I said finally. And I'll be at the wedding, Jessica. Front row, in fact. Because I wouldn't miss seeing you get everything you deserve. She hung up on me. The day of the wedding arrived like a thunderstorm you can see coming from miles away. Martha's Vineyard in July is beautiful, all rolling green lawns and ocean views and the kind of old-money elegance that Jessica's family wore like a second skin. The venue was perfect, a historic estate overlooking the water, with white tents and enough flowers to stock a small nursery. Even I had to admit it was impressive. But as I walked toward the ceremony in my one good suit, the navy blue one I'd bought for David's high school graduation, I felt the familiar weight of eyes on me. Jessica's family and friends had that particular way of looking at someone who didn't belong, like they were trying to figure out how I'd managed to slip past security. The ceremony itself was beautiful. David looked happier than I'd seen him in months, and Jessica was radiant in a dress that probably cost more than most people's cars. I sat in the front row where I belonged, the father of the groom, and I watched my son promise his life to a woman who thought mine was worthless. But it was the reception where Jessica really showed her true colors. The reception tent was filled with exactly the kind of people she'd promised: politicians I recognized from the news, business leaders whose companies had government contracts worth millions, military officials in dress uniforms that made my old service feel like a distant dream. The champagne flowed like water, the band played songs that cost more per note than most people make in an hour, and Jessica held court like the queen of her own little kingdom. The trouble started during the toasts. Her father spoke first, welcoming David to the family and talking about the bright future ahead of them. Her maid of honor followed with stories about their college days and Jessica's determination to succeed. Then David took the microphone, and his voice cracked a little as he thanked everyone for coming and talked about how lucky he felt to marry the woman of his dreams. Then Jessica stood up. "I have something I want to say too," she announced, her voice carrying easily across the tent. The champagne had loosened her tongue, and there was a glitter in her eyes that I recognized as danger. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, especially all of David's family." She paused, and her gaze found me across the room. "I know some of you have been wondering about David's background, about where he comes from. And I want you to know that even though his father never achieved much in life, he's just a guard, he works doors, not deals. David has risen above all that. He's proof that you can overcome any humble beginning if you're willing to work hard and surround yourself with the right kind of people." The tent went dead silent. I could hear the ocean waves in the distance and the clink of someone setting down a champagne glass too hard. "I mean, let's be honest," she continued, warming to her theme. "Michael spent his whole life checking badges and walking around empty buildings. He drives a car that's held together with prayer and duct tape, lives in a one-bedroom apartment, and shops at discount stores. But that's okay. Not everyone can be successful. Someone has to do the unglamorous jobs, right?" Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd, the kind that happens when people aren't sure if they should be entertained or horrified. "The point is," Jessica went on, "David refused to let his father's limitations define him. He chose to aim higher, to be better, to marry into a family that could give him the opportunities his upbringing never could. And I'm so proud of him for that courage." She raised her glass. "To overcoming our origins." The toast hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Most of the guests raised their glasses half-heartedly, but I could see the discomfort on their faces. Even by Jessica's standards, this was cruel. She'd just publicly humiliated the father of the groom at her own wedding reception, in front of hundreds of people, and she was smiling like she'd done something clever. David looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. His face was white as his shirt, and I could see him searching the crowd for me, probably wondering if I was going to storm out or cause a scene. But I didn't move. I sat there calmly, my hands folded in my lap, and waited. Because I knew something Jessica didn't know. I knew that among the guests she was so eager to impress were 3 men who knew exactly who I really was. I knew that Colonel Harrison from the Pentagon was sitting at table 6, trying to decide whether to laugh or stand up and give her a piece of his mind. I knew that Senator Matthews from the Armed Services Committee was at table 12, probably wondering if he should say something about the man who'd saved his son's life in Kandahar. And I knew that Director Collins from the State Department was at table 4, most likely calculating how many classified operations I'd run that Jessica would never hear about. But I also knew something else. I knew that sometimes the universe has a sense of timing so perfect, so absolutely flawless, that you can't help but believe in justice. Just as Jessica was basking in the scattered applause from her toast, just as she was sitting back down with that satisfied smile on her face, 3 men in dark suits entered the tent. They moved with the kind of purpose that makes everyone else step aside, and they were heading straight for the head table. The lead agent, because that's what they were, federal agents, approached Jessica and David with a formal envelope that bore an official seal I recognized immediately. "Excuse me, he said, his voice cutting through the wedding reception chatter like a knife. "We're looking for Michael Turner." The tent went from murmur quiet to tomb silent in the space of a heartbeat. "That would be me," I said, standing up slowly from my place at the family table. The agent turned to me and extended the envelope. "Mr. Turner, by order of the President of the United States and the Director of Central Intelligence, you are hereby summoned for immediate consultation on matters of national security. These documents also contain recognition for your decades of classified service to this country." I took the envelope, broke the seal, and began to read aloud in a voice that carried to every corner of that tent. To Michael J. Turner, in recognition of 28 years of distinguished service in classified operations across 4 continents. Your work in counterintelligence, anti-terrorism, and diplomatic security has saved countless American lives and protected interests vital to national security. You are hereby awarded the Intelligence Star for Valor, the Distinguished Service Medal, and the gratitude of a nation that cannot publicly acknowledge your sacrifices. The silence in that tent was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. The President of the United States, I continued, requests your immediate consultation on emerging threats in the Middle East, based on your unparalleled expertise in regional operations and your security clearance status, which remains active at the highest levels. I folded the letter and looked up at a room full of people whose expressions ranged from shock to awe to something approaching terror. "Oh," I added, almost as an afterthought, and effective immediately, "my pension benefits are being adjusted to reflect the true nature of my service." Turns out those nights I spent checking badges were actually protecting assets worth more than most small countries' GDP. The applause started slowly. Colonel Harrison began clapping first, then Senator Matthews, then Director Collins. Within seconds, the entire tent was erupting in applause, not the polite golf clap of a wedding toast, but the kind of thunderous ovation that shakes the ground. I looked at Jessica. Her face had gone from flushed pink to paper white to a sickly green color I'd never seen on a human being before. Her mouth was hanging open like she was trying to catch flies, and her eyes were darting around the room as if she was looking for an escape route that didn't exist. David was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. "Dad," he whispered. "Is this real?" "It's real, son. It's all real. And I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner, but some things have to stay buried until the right moment." The agent who delivered the summons leaned over to Jessica, who was still frozen in her chair. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you might want to know that Mr. Turner holds one of the highest security clearances in the federal government. He's personally briefed 3 presidents and has more confirmed kills than most special forces units. Just thought you should know, given your earlier comments." Jessica made a sound like a deflating balloon. But the real justice was just beginning. As the initial shock wore off and people began to process what had just happened, the reaction started. I watched Jessica's carefully cultivated social circle begin to turn on her like a pack of wolves who'd suddenly realized they'd been following the wrong alpha. Mrs. Pemberton from the country club, who'd been nodding along with Jessica's toast just minutes earlier, was now whispering urgently to her husband about that poor man and how disgusting it was to humiliate a war hero. The mayor's wife, who'd been cold to me all evening, was suddenly making her way over to apologize for not recognizing my service sooner. But the most satisfying reaction came from Jessica's own father. Richard Whitmore was a man who'd built his construction empire on government contracts. His company specialized in secure facilities, military installations, and federal buildings. As he processed what had just happened, as he realized that his daughter had just publicly humiliated someone with the kind of security clearance that could make or break his business, I watched his face go through a fascinating series of expressions. First came confusion. Then understanding. Then horror. Then pure, undiluted panic. He was already pulling out his phone, probably to start damage control, when it began to ring. And then it rang again. And again. By the time he'd answered the third call, his face had gone gray. "Richard," his wife asked. "What's wrong?" "The Henderson contract," he said numbly. "They're pulling the Henderson contract. Something about security concerns and reviewing our family's suitability for classified work." I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But Jessica? Jessica was having a full meltdown right there at her own wedding reception. She was crying, not pretty wedding tears, but the ugly, mascara-running sobs of someone who's just realized they've destroyed everything they've spent years building. Her new husband was trying to comfort her, but she kept pushing him away and pointing at me like I'd somehow orchestrated this whole thing. "You knew," she kept saying. "You knew this whole time and you let me. I let you show everyone who you really are," I said calmly. "I let you reveal your character without any interference from me. And now everyone can see what I've been dealing with for 2 years." The wedding reception pretty much fell apart after that. Half the guests were crowding around me, wanting to hear stories they knew I couldn't tell, offering business cards and consulting opportunities. The other half were edging away from Jessica and her family like they might catch whatever social disease had just destroyed the bride's reputation. By the time the evening was over, videos of Jessica's toast and the subsequent revelation were already appearing on social media. Someone had live-streamed the whole thing, and within hours, #GuardGate was trending on Twitter. The video of her mocking a decorated veteran went viral faster than anything I'd ever seen. The comments were brutal. "Imagine being so entitled that you mock a war hero at your own wedding. This woman just destroyed her family's business in under 5 minutes. The look on her face when she realized who he really was, priceless. Never judge someone by their job. You never know who you're talking to." But the real consequences were just beginning. Within 48 hours of the wedding, 3 major federal contracts that Jessica's father's company held were suspended pending security reviews. Within a week, 2 more were cancelled outright. The official reason was always some variation of suitability concerns, but everyone in their industry knew exactly what had happened. Jessica had publicly insulted someone with the kind of connections that could end careers, and now her family was paying the price. The social fallout was even worse. Martha's Vineyard high society might tolerate a lot of things, but publicly humiliating a war hero at your own wedding was not one of them. Jessica found herself uninvited from charity boards, dropped from country club committees, and generally treated like a social pariah. The same people who'd been competing for invitations to her wedding 6 months earlier were now crossing the street to avoid her. David filed for divorce 3 months later. He came to see me the night he served her the papers, and he looked older than his 29 years. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. "I'm sorry I didn't defend you. I'm sorry I let her make me ashamed of who you are. I'm sorry I believed her version of your life instead of trusting what I knew about your character." "You don't need to apologize, son. You were in love. Love makes us do stupid things sometimes. Were you ever really just a security guard?" I smiled. "I was a lot of things, David. Some of them I can talk about, some of them I can't. But the most important thing I ever was your father. Everything else was just a job. As for me, well, those consulting offers that started pouring in after the wedding weren't just politeness. It turns out that when you've spent 3 decades in the shadows protecting American interests, there are a lot of people who value your expertise. My retirement lasted about as long as it took me to realize I could make more money in 1 month of consulting than I'd made in 2 years of checking badges. But the real satisfaction wasn't the money or the recognition or the vindication. The real satisfaction was watching Jessica's world crumble under the weight of her own arrogance, knowing that she'd done it entirely to herself. 6 months after the wedding, I ran into her at a grocery store. She was in the discount aisle, looking at generic brands and counting coupons. Her designer clothes were gone, replaced by off-the-rack outfits that looked suspiciously like the ones she used to mock me for wearing. Her hair had grown out to its natural color, brown, not the expensive blonde she'd maintained for years. She saw me before I saw her, and for a moment, I thought she might run. But instead, she walked over, her head down like a child who'd been caught stealing. "Michael," she said quietly. I wanted to apologize. For everything. I know it doesn't matter now, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I looked at this woman who'd spent 2 years trying to make me feel worthless, who'd mocked my car and my apartment and my clothes, who tried to exclude me from my own son's wedding because I didn't meet her standards. Now she was shopping for discount groceries and wearing the kind of clothes she'd once considered beneath her notice. "Jessica," I said, "do you know what I learned in all those years you thought I was just checking badges?" She shook her head. "I learned that true strength doesn't need to announce itself. True honor doesn't require recognition. And true character reveals itself not when things are going well, but when they're falling apart." I paused, watching her process this. "You spent 2 years judging me by my paycheck instead of my character. You made my son ashamed of his own father because I didn't drive the right car or live in the right neighborhood or wear the right clothes. You tried to erase me from his life because I didn't meet your arbitrary standards of success." Her eyes were filling with tears. "But here's the thing about judgment, Jessica. It's a boomerang. Every cruel word you spoke, every dismissive laugh, every time you made me feel small, it all came back to you with interest. And the universe has a much better memory than you thought." She was crying openly now, right there in the cereal aisle. "I know," she whispered. "I know, and I'm sorry. I lost everything. My marriage, my family's business, my friends, my reputation. Everything." "No," I said gently. "You didn't lose everything. You lost the things you valued most, money, status, appearances. But you still have the chance to learn something valuable from this experience." "What's that?" "You can learn to value people for who they are, not what they have. You can learn to treat everyone with dignity, regardless of their job or their car or their clothes. You can learn that the person serving your coffee or checking your groceries or guarding your building might have a story you never imagined." She nodded, wiping her eyes with a store tissue. "And Jessica? You can learn to rebuild your life on something more solid than other people's opinions. Because at the end of the day, character is the only thing that really matters. Everything else is just window dressing." I left her there in that grocery store, and I never saw her again. But I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd taken a job as a social worker, helping veterans navigate the system for benefits and services. Apparently, she'd found meaning in work that actually helped people instead of just helping herself. Maybe she learned something after all. As for me, I'm still Michael Turner. I'm still 62 years old. But I'm no longer the man whose life my daughter-in-law thought was worth $12 an hour. These days, I consult for Fortune 500 companies on security matters, I speak at conferences about threat assessment, and I live in a penthouse apartment with a view of the harbor. My Honda Civic has been replaced by something with more horsepower, and my discount store suits are now custom-tailored. But the most important change isn't in my bank account or my address. The most important change is in how people see me, including how I see myself. For too many years, I let Jessica's treatment make me question my own worth. I let her constant criticism make me smaller, quieter, less sure of myself. I started to believe that maybe she was right, maybe I hadn't achieved enough, maybe I was just a failure in a cheap suit. But that night at the wedding reception, when the truth finally came out, I remembered something important: you can't let other people define your value. Your worth isn't determined by your job title or your salary or the car you drive. Your worth is determined by what you've done, who you've helped, how you've lived your life when no one was watching. I spent 28 years in the shadows, protecting people who never knew my name. I saved lives that couldn't be publicly acknowledged. I prevented disasters that never made the news because they never happened. I served my country not for glory or recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. That service didn't become less valuable because I chose to walk away from it. It didn't become meaningless because I decided to live quietly in retirement. And it certainly didn't disappear because some entitled young woman decided I didn't meet her standards. The lesson here isn't that everyone has a secret past or hidden accomplishments. Most people don't. Most people are exactly who they appear to be, hard-working individuals trying to make an honest living and take care of their families. But every single one of those people deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of what they do for work. The man checking your groceries might be putting himself through medical school. The woman cleaning your office might be supporting 3 kids on her own. The guard in your building lobby might have stories that would make your hair stand on end. Or they might just be people trying to earn an honest living, and that's enough. That's more than enough. Jessica's mistake wasn't just underestimating me. Her mistake was believing that a person's value could be measured by their apparent success. She looked at my modest car and apartment and clothes and decided I was worth dismissing. She never bothered to learn about my character, my history, my sacrifices. She judged the book by its cover and missed the entire story inside. And in the end, that judgment destroyed her. But here's what I want you to understand: I didn't plan what happened at that wedding. I didn't orchestrate some elaborate revenge scheme. I simply chose to be patient. I chose to let time and truth do their work. Because the thing about arrogance is that it eventually trips over itself. The thing about cruelty is that it eventually finds its way home. Jessica spent 2 years trying to humiliate me, and in the end, she humiliated herself in front of hundreds of people. She tried to make me look small, and instead, she revealed her own pettiness. She attempted to exile me from my son's life, and instead, she exiled herself from everything she thought mattered. The universe didn't punish her because I deserved better treatment. The universe punished her because cruelty always has consequences. Karma isn't some mystical force, it's simply the natural result of our choices catching up with us. If you've ever been judged by your paycheck instead of your character, this story is for you. If you've ever been dismissed because of your job or your car or your clothes, I want you to know that their judgment says nothing about your worth and everything about their character. You don't need a secret past or hidden accomplishments to deserve respect. You don't need to prove yourself to people who've already decided you're not worth their time. You just need to live with integrity, treat others with kindness, and trust that eventually, the truth will reveal itself. Sometimes that revelation comes dramatically, like it did at Jessica's wedding. Sometimes it comes quietly, over years of small moments that add up to a life well lived. But it always comes. The people who matter will see your true value. The people who don't see it don't matter. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe delivers justice so perfect, so poetic, that it restores your faith in the idea that good things happen to good people and that arrogance always, eventually, gets exactly what it deserves. My name is Michael Turner. I'm 62 years old. And my life is worth a hell of a lot more than $12 an hour. Remember that the next time someone tries to tell you otherwise.